This is the Financially Simple Podcast, a show dedicated to destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner. And now, here's your host, pizza-loving, certified financial planner, Justin Goodbread.
Welcome to Financially Simple. This is a finance show for small business owners about money, how it works in our business and our personal lives, and how we can build wealth to be financially independent. I'm your host, Justin Goodbread, and today is a special episode. Today's episode is titled, What Entity Should a New Business Owner Choose or Select? And I have a special guest in studio with us today, and he's a friend of mine named Lee Popkin. And let me tell you about Lee. Lee is an attorney. And if you've listened to me for some time on the podcast, you've heard me tout the praises of attorneys. Now, I also do a couple of attorney jokes, and we're going to leave those off the air because Lee's probably heard every one of them, can tell me better ones than I can tell him. But Lee's an attorney who focuses on taxes and estate type planning and business planning. Let me tell you a little bit about Lee. He graduated from Miami, Ohio with an undergraduate degree in accounting. Now, I don't know many attorneys who actually know how to count numbers. Lee's one of the special ones that I know that can do that. I know a couple, but he has an undergraduate degree in accounting. Then he went to law school in Memphis on the opposite side of the state. We're in the beautiful side in East Tennessee, don't you agree? It's beautiful over here. Yeah. Memphis is not the same. Not saying to my friends in Memphis that it's ugly. It's just a little different part of Tennessee. But he went to law school in Memphis, and he finished up a specialized degree in LLM. And that stands for like Lincoln Mary. What's it actually stand for, LLM?
Well, it's a master's in law. I don't know why it's LLM, but it's a master's in law.
So you went to New York to get a degree in tax. You learned taxes, a master's degree in law and tax in New York. Now, Lee's a partner in the law firm Long, Ragsdale, and Waters at the very young age. I mean, this guy didn't even have any gray head on his hair. A little bit he's showing me. But no, he's currently a partner. And the reason why I like Lee is because he specializes with business owners in the area of taxation. And if you listen to some of my recordings before, I've always talked about how a good tax attorney is worth their weight in gold. Folks, I use a tax attorney. In fact, Lee is my personal attorney. I'm not ashamed to say that. Lee has done work for our firm. He's done work for many of our clients in our firm, Heritage Investors, and I've never heard a complaint. I've always heard good things, and if you've ever worked with an attorney, you know that sometimes that area of business can be a little frustrating for people, and I've not dealt with that. In fact, just this last week, some of my best clients, some of my favorite clients, he just finished up an estate plan with them. So with that introduction, Lee, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today, man.
Well, thanks for having me. I want to back up for a minute and say, for my friends out there in Memphis, I really enjoyed my time there. I was downtown. I really enjoyed it. I got nothing but great things to say about Memphis, so let's set the record straight on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get us in trouble on that. I always just say the East Tennessee is the pretty side of the state. Good.
Well, there's no question about that. I'll agree. We got the pretty side.
Okay, way to fix me there, just like an attorney fixing my mess-ups. Guys, this is why I hired one, because they listen to what I say and they're like, Justin, you can't say that, man. Let's jump right into some questions here, Lee. So we want to talk about entities. And whenever we were talking about the pre-show here, you said, Justin, probably it's going to be best if we talk about the history of how these entities come about. So I'm going to turn over to you and let's just talk about entity selection.
Okay, so what I'd like to talk about really is the selection choice historically of somebody that wanted to do business. And for this, we'll plan on there being more than one owner of the business.
Okay.
So historically, the options for doing business, if you wanted an entity, corporation, limited partnership, or general partnership.
Right.
And each one kind of had advantages and disadvantages. A corporation had the asset shield that kept any of the individual owners from being liable for the debts and obligations of the corporation. However, was subject to double taxation, tax at the entity level and then a second level tax at the shareholder level on dividends. As time emerged, there were limited partnerships, but one of the problems with a limited partnership, which is going to be taxed as a pass-through at the individual levels, there's a general partner who has to be liable for the debts and obligations of the limited partnership.
So what does that mean?
So a limited partnership is managed by its general partner.
Okay, so the head honcho.
Typically, in a structure, you'll have a limited partnership that's comprised of a 99% limited partner or partners and a 1% general partnership interest. And that 1% general partner is liable for all the debts and obligations of the limited partnership. Now, in reality, what ends up happening is that general partner ends up being an entity as opposed to an individual because the general partner is liable. Even with a limited partnership structure, having a corporate general partner is resulting in multiple entities being created. So that's not a great solution. And the other option that had been out there historically was just a general partnership. Okay. It's easy, it's simple. So, Justin, in a simple context, you and I get together.
Right.
We're partners for a venture. You don't even have to have a partnership agreement. It could be an oral partnership. Just says, hey, we're going to go out, we're going to be partners in this. Problem with that is you're liable for all the debts and obligations, and any one partner can bind the partnership. So we're general partners. I'm liable for the debts and obligations of the partnership. You go out and get a bank loan for the partnership, and I'm liable for the debts of the partnership. So I could be on the hook for that entire amount. Now, are banks really going to do that without the consent of the partners? Probably not, but these are some of the problems, the historical problems with these choice of entities. So somewhere around the mid-90s, limited liabilities companies were formed, or LLCs. Wyoming was the first state to pass a statute. Here in Tennessee, where I practice law, probably sometime in the mid-90s, they were passed here. And LLCs are the predominant choice of business.
Why is that?
They combine the best aspects of a corporation, which is the asset protection, the shield. You don't have to have a general partner. So all of the members of an LLC are going to have asset protection. They're going to have the corporate shield of the limited liability company, while at the same time, the default tax classification is going to be pass-through, like a partnership.
Okay.
And as a result, it's single taxation with the asset protection. So it's the combination of both worlds.
So let me pause there for a second to make sure I heard you right. A corporation, a standard corporation, we're going to have double taxation in that entity in its bare bone, pure estate. But the cool thing is we have corporate veil or some sort of protection around me, the business owner. So if the corporation does something, I'm not personally liable.
That's right. Okay. That's right. Now there's common law that allows for piercing the corporate veil, but as a general rule, if you're just a shareholder in the corporation, you're not going to be liable for the debts and obligations of it.
And I guess, guys, it goes without saying, and Lee, you and I were talking about this, there's so many little nuances about today's conversation. Am I correct? That, I mean, there's 1,000 different ways we can go in any of these conversations. There's always something that, like you just mentioned, there's little nuances that could come about. But in general, we're talking very broad generalities, and nothing we're saying today is legal advice in any way. We're not telling you to follow Lee's advice. We're basically just saying, hey, here's some information. This is for educational purposes only. Would you agree with that?
Yes, this is definitely not legal advice. And it's important to really understand because there are so many nuances in forming a business that you got to take into consideration, including what state you're in, because different states have different taxing on certain types of entities.
I do want to come back to that because that was a question I had for you. But so a standard corporation, we have double taxation, but we have the entity protection. In a general partnership, we have the pass-through, but someone else could bind us to liabilities, etc.
That's right.
Okay.
Not only could they bind us, you're inherently liable for anything that happens at the partnership level. So a general partnership owns a building. Somebody comes in, slips and falls in that building. Each of the general partners are potentially liable for the personal injury to that person.
So the LLC comes around in the mid-90s, depending on the state or whatever, and they took the best of those three classifications, the corporation, the general partner, and the limited partner, and tried to make an entity that showed the best of all that. Is that my understanding?
That's exactly right. And particularly, at least in Tennessee, where I practice, we have three types of limited liability companies you can select from. One that's member managed, which is its structure from a management perspective is supposed to be similar to a general partnership. We have manager-managed LLCs, which are to be much like a limited partnership where the manager acts as the capacity a general partner would. And we have director-managed LLCs, which are very comparable to a corporation. So it is intended to combine the best of the prior types of entities with the taxation and the defaults that you can choose from. So you can get past through if that's what you want.
I haven't heard you mention the S Corporation at all. Can we bring that animal onto the table now? Now we've kind of outlaid the LLC, but another popular one out there that I see a lot, and I know you deal with it quite often, is the S Corp. How is that any different than this LLC?
Well, let's start with what an S Corp is. So an S Corp is really just a corporation. It's a state law corporation which has elected on Form 2553 to be treated as taxed under subchapter S. And what that does is allows for pass-through taxation. Forgetting the tax, one of the biggest differences between an S corporation and an LLC is that, in my estimation, an S corp actually offers less asset protection than an LLC, both in the traditional sense of shielding you from the assets of the company, because with corporations, you have to have shareholder meetings, bylaws, and it's much more formalities, which if you don't follow under the common law piercing the corporate veil, are factors. With an LLC, there's generally no requirements of having annual meetings.
So, Lee, talk to me about the differences in asset protection between an LLC and an S corporation. Does one give us better advantages than the other?
Yeah, actually, believe it or not, in my estimation, an LLC is going to have better asset protection than a corporation, both from the traditional sense of protecting you from the assets, the liabilities inside the entity, and what's called reverse piercing the veil, which is at the shareholder or owner level. So why don't I just kind of start with the traditional?
Okay.
Because you're looking at me a little...
I've never heard that before. Talk to me about... I know the traditional. I've never heard the latter. So let's lay out the traditional so everybody's on the same page with us.
Okay. So with the traditional, let's start with corporation.
Okay.
We started with the rule that shareholders of a corporation are shielded from the liabilities of the corporation. But there are formal requirements under statute for a corporation. Got to have shareholder meetings, got to have directors, got to follow these formalities.
Right.
And in my estimation, it's the one area that probably shareholders fail the most because you're busy running your business.
Right.
You're not busy keeping minutes and having shareholder meetings and board meetings. Whereas with LLCs, under the Act, at least the Tennessee Act, probably the Delaware Act as well, there's no formal requirement to have meetings of the members.
Okay.
There's no board requirement. You can just be as simple as a member-managed LLC. The big thing is keep your bank accounts, business bank accounts. Don't commingle your personal. In other words, don't use your business as your personal piggy bank.
Right.
Okay. So you were looking at me strange.
Yeah. Explain that to me. So you're saying there's a little bit of liability difference between on a personal level.
Yeah. So, Justin, let's use a context of, we've been talking about landscapers.
Right, yeah.
All right. You've got a business that you're going to form, and let's say you form it as a corporation, an S Corp. You own stock in that corporation. You have a creditor,
right,
for any reason. Could be completely unrelated to your business. Drive and have an accident.
I throw a rock and hit somebody in the head and kill them while they're passing by the car. I actually saw that happen one time.
Okay, yeah, you might have bigger problems than just that. Let's say you've murdered somebody unintentionally, let's say. Your creditor, the person who was hit by this rock,
yeah,
if they get a judgment against you and you haven't satisfied the monetary amount of that judgment, they can actually physically take custody of your stock in the corporation. And if you're the shareholder, the sole shareholder, they can force a liquidation of that corporation and acquire all the assets of it.
Okay.
Turn it into money, essentially. On the other hand, if it's an LLC and they're the only creditor, and we're going to ignore bankruptcy context because there's different rules with bankruptcy, the judgment creditor, all they can obtain against you from an LLC, at least in Tennessee, and a lot of states have adapted similar statutes, is what's called a charging order. So the same creditor can't come and take your membership interest. All they can get is a charging order against distributions from your LLC. So they can't force it into liquidation.
So in an S corporation, they can take my stock, almost do a hostile takeover, sell all my lawn equipment, my trucks, everything else, and get whatever they can for that. But in a LLC, they can get a charging order, being that if I take a distribution of $100,000 out of the LLC, they have right to some or all of that.
Right. And here's the real thing where these are great. If you're worried about asset protection, having a multi-member LLC is going to offer more protection. As I said, bankruptcy's got its own special rules. But here's the real beauty. A charging order can have negative value sometimes if it's a small privately owned partnership. Because if you, Justin, are in there with your family members and maybe it's a business that's done well, you can sustain not making distributions out. It's still earning income.
Right.
So the charging order, the creditors could have income allocated to them if they got a financial rights interest without any cash coming in.
So the bottom line is, in the analogy that we laid out, the rock goes underneath the mower, hits somebody in the passerby. It could be argued, again, every state is different. We've already laid that out there, but it could be argued that an LLC might offer a little bit better asset protection in that scenario, at least in Tennessee, than the S Corporation.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Cool.
All right.
You are listening to Financially Simple, destroying the complexities of money for today's small business owner.
So let's talk then about the tax benefits. Because we know that the corporations, let's not even deal with that beast, okay? Because most people I deal with and you deal with are going to be S corporations or LLCs. We do have the occasional corporation. We do have the occasional general partnership. But for sake of time and energy today, let's focus on those LLCs and the S corporations.
Okay.
What's the tax benefit of the entity selections there?
Here is where the nuances are everything, and it's real important to meet with somebody and understand. I'm going to back up and bifurcate prior to 2018 and going forward. So end of 2017, we get the new tax law.
Yeah.
So prior to that, if you lived in a state other than Tennessee, so don't listen to this if you're in Tennessee, but in a lot of other states, there was an actual tax advantage for an operating entity to be an S Corp because you could pay yourself a reasonable salary, and the amount of money that the company earned above that, you could dividend out, and the income's taxed at the owner's level. Amount that you're paying yourself in salary is W-2, but there's no payroll wages on the amount that's going out as a dividend.
Right.
So there was, on an operating from a perspective of the employment taxes, some benefit to being an S Corp. In Tennessee, where I practice, there are some local laws called excise tax and hall income tax that actually resulted in the opposite of that. But for people who are maybe in Georgia or other states going forward, as of 2018, you may consider, are you really still better being an S Corp? Are you better off being an LLC, either as a disregarded entity, meaning there's one member, or a LLC with multiple members, taxed as a partnership? And the reason for that is the new tax law has this concept called qualified business income, which owners of small businesses such as, and I'm putting small in parentheses, pass-through businesses such as an LLC and S Corp or a limited partnership can obtain up to a 20% deduction on their qualified business income.
Right.
Qualified business income does not include employment from an S Corp. And with an S Corp, you have to pay yourself a reasonable wage. Whereas with a partnership or a proprietorship, which is an LLC this only has one member, it's going to all be subject to self-employment tax, but that's not considered comp as we understand the law to be, meaning that there's a good argument that 100% of the income is going to be eligible for the qualified business income deduction of 20%, assuming you meet the other requirements.
After this law was passed, Lee, it was middle of December whenever they finally, or right before Christmas, I think it was, whenever the president finally signed it. I can remember all the phone calls that I was getting. In fact, I think I even heard you say that I went in and printed off this crazy bill. What are your thoughts on this new law? I know it's a benefit for us small business owners. And folks, like we talked about in the past, small business owners, that's not a slam. Small business, according to the SBA, is anybody with less than 500 employees. I mean, there's 4.7 million small businesses last study in the United States. That includes most businesses outside of those publicly traded. So that's what Lee meant by small business. outside of a small business who are going to get that 20%, what's just a broad brush? And I know I'm putting you a little off topic to let you take a break on this entity. What's your broad brush stroke on this new tax bill?
I'm kind of going to take a little bit of a wait and see approach.
Yeah.
Here's my kind of general observation. I think everybody acknowledged that with respect to C corporations on a worldwide basis, 35% was too high.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense to have it somewhere in the 20 to 21% range. And that wasn't really very controversial.
Right.
The controversial part is the pass-through deduction.
Yeah.
I think it's a question of how much is that going to increase the deficit versus how much economic growth there's going to be. And from what I understand, it's going to require somewhere around 3% GDP growth per year. And I think that's going to be extremely difficult when you look at what it's going to take and as low as unemployment is and other variables to actually obtain that and achieve that on a consistent basis.
Could be interesting, couldn't it?
And certainly there was some stuff thrown in that you kind of scratch your head and say, well, why do these people get the benefit of the 20% deduction, but these don't? I think the general intention as a whole was to reward businesses that are doing things to create jobs. And we'll see if it gets us there. I don't know.
So with that thought, let me pull us back. Here's the question I get all the time. And Lee, we have listeners out in California all the way to Australia. So those in Australia, this is U.S. tax. I apologize. But one of the questions I get is, how do I make the decision between the LLC and the S Corporation on a tax basis? They're not looking at the liability basis, some of the things you pointed out earlier in our conversation. They're looking at it strictly from a tax perspective. Is that something that they need to go sit down with the attorney on, kind of walk through? Is that something they need to meet with their CPA on? How would I do that? How would I make that decision?
I've always believed that the left hand has to know what the right hand's doing. So the business owner is going to be the quarterback of this thing. And we're here to help offer advice. And I like to know, particularly if they work with an accountant before, the accountant's perspective on it. I think what you'll find with this new pass-through bill is, for the most part, you're going to prefer partnership taxation as opposed to being taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is you can form an LLC and defer for a little bit the selection, because an LLC, actually the default, if you have two members or more, is partnership. But you can elect for an LLC to be taxed as a C Corp or an S Corp. If you start out as a corporation, you can't elect to be taxed as a partnership. So I kind of like the idea of, let's form an LLC. Let's probably plan on just keeping the default classification, but we can always elect for our LLC to be taxed in the future as a corporation or an S Corp, where if you start the other way, there's generally tax involved in trying to switch back to an LLC.
All right, so with that thought, we have two questions left. We're running out of time here today, and I don't want to push our welcome here. Let's say I'm a small business owner. I want to start a business, because we're dealing with startups here. And I hear that Lee is a good attorney who can give me some guidance on which entities to select. Whenever we're talking about the pre-show notes here, you said, Justin, one of the things I always need to know is, what's the plan for the entity? Do I plan on, like in my business, I want to grow it and sell it? You know, we have people who are listening to that. You and I work with mutual clients who are trying to grow businesses to sell them, or in the process of selling them. What can I expect as just the Joe Blow off the streets who walk into a Lee Popkin of the world, the tax attorney? What can I expect that person to think through? In other words, how are you going to walk me through and decide on which entity should I select?
Right. And I think that with the new tax law, the answer is generally going to be an LLC. Even if you're planning on going public at some point, you can start as an LLC and convert in the future.
Okay.
I think what a lawyer is going to help you do is plan out simple things like, do you have your articles of organization in place? Do you have your operating agreement? Uh-huh. If you've got more than one member, what's your buy-sell provisions? What happens if there's deadlock?
Right.
How many people does it take to decide to sell the business? How many people does it take to decide to get loans for the business? And kind of walk through those decisions on the front end so that everybody knows 5 years from now where we're at. One of the hardest things that you can find in business is a 50-50 partnership.
Right.
If you got a big business with 9 or 10 partners and there's disagreement and you're the one disagreeing, chances are you're the jerk.
Right.
If it's you and another person and you disagree, you each think the other person's being unreasonable. And, you know, the more planning you can do on the front end to be aware of that and to have contingencies in place the better served you are as a business owner. So I think that that's an important part of the process.
And what could someone who's walking off the street, who is referred to an attorney, what can someone expect to pay for your expertise in that area? I know you can't give me a firm dollar figure, but are we talking tens of thousands of dollars here, Lee?
It's like, Justin, how much does it cost to build a house, right?
Seriously.
It depends. I would say starting on the low end, somebody that's just in the trades that says, I'm going to be the only owner of this business. Nobody else is ever going to own it. I just want an LLC so I can have asset protection and I can have my business accounts, and I'm not really worried about other members. Can you help me get it started? Okay, well, in that case, they're going to owe this, I'll go by Tennessee because that's what I know. Tennessee Secretary of State's going to charge somewhere around $300 to form that. As an attorney, maybe somewhere $500 to $600, depending on what I'm asked to do to help with that startup. So it could be under $1,000 having your LLC in place.
Right.
On the other hand, they come in and it's a complex transaction where you've got a person that's the sweat equity, you got an investor that's putting in money, and we're working on leases and agreements back and forth and a waterfall provision on preferred returns. That is going to really just be dependent. And something like that's going to be on an hourly basis.
Right.
And what I think a good lawyer should do is give you a budget of what they anticipate it being. And I will say this. In my experience, when you're dealing with multiple members, the more you can get them to agree to the business terms before you start drafting them better. Once it get real expensive, or they tell me, hey, this is kind of what we want to do. We get in there, I draft it exactly, get the waterfall provisions matching, the tax provisions dovetail. We spend a lot of time to get to that, and they decide, you know what, we're going to do this deal another way. And all that time's lost.
Right.
So the more specific you can be and thought out on the front end, even if it's a term sheet that you can use to draft, I always try and encourage that to keep the cost commensurate with the benefit of what they're receiving.
So, folks, we're about out of time here. The one thing I'll say, like I said, and I'm not just saying this because Lee's in front of me. You've heard me on this podcast before. A good tax attorney is worth their weight in gold. You've heard me say that you need to have 3 different professionals. You need to have a good tax attorney, business attorney. If you can find one the same, that's awesome. You need to have a good CPA and you need a good CFP. We all 3 think differently. We all do. We all have different roles to play. Even if you're starting up a grass cutting business, Lee, I don't see where one of these websites, you go there and just pick up a little quick entity for a couple $100. That doesn't make sense to me, knowing with the business world that I'm in. I'm of the opinion that every person starting in business should at least sit down with an attorney for an hour or 2 and get some help, get some guidance.
Yeah, and I'll just respond on that last point you raised of you can go online and get these. And it's becoming more and more commoditized, the legal business. But the problem, and I've seen these documents, whether it's estate plans created online or an LLC created online, all you're getting is a document. You're getting a commodity. Mm-hmm. What you're missing is how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Right. You got an LLC, but have you titled it right? Is your lease with your LLC, or is it in your individual name? Is your equipment in your LLC? Is your insurance in place? So that's really what we're doing. And I think you could argue that the documents are free. It's the services that we're providing. That's why we don't pay sales tax.
Right.
And online does, because we're providing a service.
Right. I agree with you. So, Lee, how can people get a hold of you? If they're in Tennessee and they have a question, or maybe they're in a different state and they just say, hey, man, we really like your personality. I know that you're licensed to do law in Tennessee, but maybe you can help other people around the country. They have just basic questions. How can folks get a hold of you?
I think probably the easiest this day and age, just go to our website,
okay.
Long, Ragsdale, and Waters, or just Google Lee Popkin, lawyer, Knoxville. I'm pretty certain it'll come up.
What we'll do, folks, is we'll put a link in the show notes to Lee's website here so you can reach out to him if you have questions. If you're in Tennessee, I know a lot of attorneys. And especially in East Tennessee. There's some really, really, really good ones, and there's some that I probably wouldn't use. Lee's one that I personally use, and I can vouch for him. I can vouch for his credibility, and I've worked with him on many, many, many different things. So if you have any questions, you're in Tennessee, reach out to him. If you have a question, you're not in Tennessee, reach out to him. If he can help you, he will. If he can't, he'll point you in the right direction. Any other comments, concerns, questions you want to do before we sign off on this thing?
Justin, I would just like to thank you for having me up here today. And Justin's so knowledgeable in these different areas. It's unbelievable. If we're talking insurance, he knows insurance better than anybody. If we're talking accounting, he knows accounting. So I appreciate being out here and look forward to any questions anybody's got. Just feel free to contact me.
Hey guys, and with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Financially Simple podcast. As always, you'll find the show notes and the links to today's podcast at financiallysimple.com under the heading podcast. Hey, while you're there, feel free to check out the blog. Sign up for the weekly newsletter. Some of my best writing is in the weekly newsletter. I write about tax tips. I listen to these guys like Lee, and I put out things when I hear on particular clients' cases. I share it with people. We deal with business planning tips, wealth management tips, so much more. Some of the best writing I do every week. Feel free to sign up for that. And as far as the podcast goes, if you like the show, subscribe. If you don't like the show, share it with somebody. Tell them why you don't like it. And like I said every week, life is hard. Life is complicated, and Lord have mercy, this tax world and the legal world, folks, I am not smart enough for this. Life can be frustrating. Money doesn't have to be. Let's continue to make our lives at least financially simple. Y'all go out and create a great day. Later.
You have been listening to the Financially Simple podcast. The information in this show is for informational purposes only. This show is not investment advice. Instead, seek help from a competent financial advisor. Justin Goodbread, CFP, is an investment advisor representative of Heritage Investors, a registered investment advisor.